My name is Marcus Lintott, and I would like to discuss the chemistry of gunpowder. But after a brief discussion of actual chemistry, I would like to discuss it in the context of both Chinese history and philosophy. Potassium nitrate, otherwise known as saltpeter KNO3, is a commonly occurring compound in China, found on all over walls and created from feces. Potassium nitrate forms naturally in warm climates, bacteria from the decomposition of feces, urine, plants, combined with air, moisture, plant ash, and alkaline soil to create nitrification. The conversion of the decaying matter into nitrates then penetrate the soil. Dissolved by rainwater, the evaporated deposits form a white powder. Once boiling and evaporating to wash away the impurities, potassium nitrate is ready for practical uses. Next ingredient is charcoal. Charcoal processed from organic compounds has a composition that is never really quite the same twice. We would often be denoting it as C7H4O. It is mostly pure carbon called char, which is made by cooking wood in a low oxygen environment for a long time. And it burns off all volatile compounds such as water, hydrogen, methane, and tar. In China, the burning took place in large clay and stone silos with very little oxygen in them, and was stopped before all of it turned to ash. The process left black lumps in powder, about 25% of the original weight. When ignited, the carbon and charcoal combines with oxygen and forms carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, water, and other gases, and releases significant quantities of energy. It packs more potential energy per ounce than raw wood. Char burns steadily and hot. Obviously, wood was readily available in China, and the tradition of making charcoal was already common during the Tang Dynasty as well. The next ingredient we're going to talk about is sulfur, or otherwise known as brimstone. There are many different historians that argue whether or not the Chinese had naturally occurring elemental deposits of sulfur that they could mine. Some historians say that the Chinese mined pyrite, iron 2 sulfide, to get elemental sulfur. The Chinese would take this pyrite and put in large blast ovens and slowly burn and heat the pyrite so that it decomposes. Once it decomposes, the sulfur vapor would be collected and then condensed into a solid, giving the Chinese their elemental sulfur. Other historians believe that elemental sulfur was naturally occurring in China, and that they could mine it naturally, and some others argue that they imported a lot of sulfur from other countries, such as India. Now, it's time to get down to business. To make gunpowder, gotta put on my trusty goggles, my safety gloves, and as always, gunpowder is a very dangerous substance to be playing with. So, as always, you should have the proper safety equipment to make it. Now, gunpowder is a mixture. It is a mixture of potassium nitrate, charcoal, and sulfur, but by percentages of weight. So it is 75% potassium nitrate, 15% charcoal, and 10% sulfur. Now you want to make sure you don't inhale the fumes from the sulfur. Now what you want to do is mix them together really well. You want to avoid the fumes if you can. There you go. And voila, you have gunpowder. Dr. Berry, I swear I didn't make real gunpowder. This is all colored sugars. This is the simplified reaction of the combustion of gunpowder. Now, it is a very complex and multi-step reaction, but this is how it's simplified. We're starting off with the reactants of potassium nitrate, carbon, and sulfur, leading to our products, potassium carbonate, potassium sulfate, carbon dioxide gas, and nitrogen gas. Now we are going to turn from chemistry to history and philosophy. First, let's be completely honest. We are about to talk about things that happened 1500 to 1800 years ago. No one knows for sure what happened, who did it, and when they did it, but that doesn't mean we aren't going to try. At some time before the Tang Dynasty, a Taoist scholar, while trying to create an elixir of life, something that would make people immortal, combined charcoal, saltpeter, and brimstone. It probably did not turn out well for him. For the first records of gunpowder were warnings not to mix those things together because they would burn your face, hands, and even your whole house down. The Chinese would call gunpowder huoya, which means fire medicine. Other Taoists continued to work with the new substance and learned to use it to make fireworks and explosives. The Chinese largely treated it as a state secret and developed very impressive colored fireworks. It was not used as a weapon until the Song Dynasty, almost 300 years later, when they adapted it to explosive arrows, cannons, and even a primitive flamethrower and used those weapons against the invading Mongol forces. It was not enough, however. The Mongols conquered the Chinese and learned the secrets of gunpowder production. The Mongols then took the technology and spread it all the way to Europe. Roger Bacon was the first Westerner to reference the use of gunpowder. He may have seen firecrackers brought from China from the Silk Road. There is great debate about science in ancient China. Let me begin by saying it is hard to try to define Chinese science using Western science as a model. The Chinese were doing advanced math, geometry, and engineering when most Westerners were still living in caves. But they did not develop our Western overall concept of science. They didn't even have a word for nature until the 1600s. Instead, they had separate fields and over time, different philosophical takes on what we would call science. The Chinese had separate fields of inquiry into mathematics, astrology, which would include our concepts of astronomy, medicine, and alchemy, which was in the West partially responsible for the birth of chemistry. These disciplines were separate and not considered part of a larger concept. Instead, they were developed their own rules and systems. Mathematics developed largely the same way as it did in the West. Medicine was a complex system of guess and check, where it was much healthier to be the one guessing than the one being guessed upon. And astrology and alchemy developed their own rules and customs. Likewise, Chinese philosophy greatly impacted what we would call science. Most Chinese thought was focused on controlling one's own mind and not the natural world. You could say that Westerners looked outwards while the Chinese looked inwards. Confucian thought believed that the knowledge was already perfected and it was relationships that mattered. When Confucian scholars discovered something new, they would go as far as to say that that is what the elders, sages must have meant, and we simply did not understand it. Instead of a concept of gaining new knowledge and growing it, Confucianists longed to go back to a golden time when knowledge was abundant. Many modern Chinese believe that this is why science was stifled in China, looking back instead of looking forward. But many other Chinese philosophies were more in tune with science. Moism was popular in the 3rd century in China, but never had the power of Confucianism, Taoism, or Buddhism. Modern philosophers often believe that they were true scientists because they studied math, optics, and engineering. In reality, Moism was an authoritarian philosophy that still largely looked back on sage elders and lacked any unified scientific theory or drive. Taoism is most often mistaken as being scientific. Why is that? Because Taoists invented a lot of impressive things, like gunpowder, tofu, and water clocks. But Taoism isn't science. Taoism is about observing and understanding the Tao inside things. Natural observation is part of our concept of science, but Western science goes further. Strangely, it may be Buddhism that is most closely corresponds to our concept of Western science. Buddhism is clearly an inward-looking philosophy and not an outward focus like Western science, but there are some very similar concepts. For example, the scientific method was discovered by Tibetan Buddhists long before Westerners wrote it down. It was the concept of dampa sum, or sum. Dampa sum literally means good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. But it entails setting an intention or hypothesis, doing the test, and reflecting on the outcome. All these philosophical strains played a role in what we would consider science. We cannot try to define what they did through a Western lens, but we can be appreciative of a people who invented math long before the Greeks did, paper, movable type, the compass, optics, and let's not forget everyone's 4th of July favorite, gunpowder.